Cinema Snob, I just have to say that you're why I started content creating in the first place.
Harumph, you should be more interested in real troll critics like Armand White. Thank you very much.
I do not get that reference, but the way you said it really made me laugh.
Hello everybody, I want to welcome you to another edition of Film Seizure at the Movies. My name is Geoff Arbuckle, and this time around we've got something a little bit different. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, this is not a movie at the movies. And I'll explain that a little bit momentarily. Also, this movie is going to be a little bit difficult for me to be able to personally review because of a couple of other things that I will also explain a little bit later. Before I get into talking about this editions of Film Seizure at the Movies, where I'm going to talk about Another Cinema Snob Movie, let me do a little bit of housekeeping. First, you can always find new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver every Wednesday at filmseizure.com. Also, every Monday, you can hear me talk about a monster movie for Monster Mondays. You can catch our episodes in several places. We've got stuff set up for Apple Podcasts, which you should still be able to get through your iTunes, although I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I'm not really an Apple guy. You can also hear us at Google Play. You can hear us on TuneIn. You can also hear us on Spotify. And we also upload our episodes to YouTube, even though there's no video. But I know that some people just kind of dig YouTube, so I get it. All right, so let's talk about the Cinema Snob. So if you go to my website, B-Movie Enema, and look back to about April of 2019, so April of this year, I had covered his first movie, the Cinema Snob movie, which is not, it's the character's first movie, I should say, regardless. Anyway, and I had kind of talked a little bit about my appreciation for the actor who plays the Cinema Snob, Brad Jones, what he what he does that I like about his reviews that is very similar to how I review movies with B-Movie Enema, so on and so forth. I've met him a couple of times at conventions. He is very cool with his fans, which is very, very appreciated from a fan standpoint. I hope that if anybody ever comes up to me and says, "Hey, aren't you the guy who blathers on about crap or whatever," that I'm pretty cool with them, even if they call what I blather on about crap. Anyway, his movie, Cinema Snob Movie, was kind of like an origin story. He had started with producing episodes or episodic videos where he reviews mostly exploitation movies. I think he goes back to something like 2007, 2008, something like that. And that first Cinema Snob movie was really kind of the origin story of that. How he became that character, how he kind of created the idea of that YouTube personality, or what eventually became a YouTube personality. Now, he does not play himself when he plays the Cinema Snob. He plays a character playing the character of the Cinema Snob. His character's name is Craig Golightly, and it's just kind of a trumped up version of himself in the sense that he kind of based it on some other people that used to just kind of would be very smug about movie reviews and movie theory or discussion and so on and so forth. So he's really makes no bones about the fact that he's kind of big on the exploitation side of things, be it exploitation horror or just like women in prison films. That the type, if you've ever read any of my stuff over at B-Movie Enema, you know what I'm talking about, because it's the same sort of stuff I like to write about. Anyway, so that was released back in 2012. Now it's 7 years later. He decided that he wanted to make a sequel that basically is 12 years later from where his character was in that first Cinema Snob movie. And this was a crowdfunded thing where basically fans of his paid to get this movie made. I mean, it's a little bit more detailed than that, but that's simply it. We paid for this movie to be made. That's why it's a little bit hard for me to really review this. As I kind of mentioned at the top, the way I review things is not necessarily critical anyway. I talk more about how I feel watching a movie, less about the actual design or maybe a little bit of the writing I'll talk about, but I don't normally get into a whole lot of the technical element of what makes a movie good or bad. I typically talk about how I feel watching a movie. So I already kind of review movies in a different sort of light. This makes it even more difficult because I was one of the people who helped chip in some money to get this movie made. I'm a fan of Brad Jones. I'm a fan of his Cinema Snob show. So to be fair, I should probably say that this is not a movie that is possible for me to review. That does bring up another point that I'll get to momentarily, but regardless, I also mentioned that this is not a movie that's at the movies. Well, this was released digitally just last night, actually at midnight last night. And it is DVD and VOD only. So, really the whole name of this review, the whole everything, it's kind of a fraud, I guess, all the way around. But that's beside the point. Let me talk a little bit about what this movie is about. Like I had mentioned, I'm not going to give away any spoilers or anything like that. As I mentioned, this is 12 years after the first Cinema Snob movie. Craig Golightly, which is Brad Jones's character, and his friend Neil Hall have made a movie about the Cinema Snob, and it's called the Cinema Snob Movie. And in a way, it is kind of a parody of his original Cinema Snob movie. And it flat bombs. It's a total disaster for them. And what they kind of decide to do, it takes a little bit of time for them to kind of come around to understanding what they need to do. But what they ultimately decide to do is that Craig needs to reconnect with his father, who's played by Lloyd Kaufman, and basically ask for his help. Lloyd Kaufman's Stanley Golightly is a very successful TV producer, loaded rich, might be able to help kind of dig them out of some of these problems that they have. And at that point in time, it basically becomes a road trip movie, but it very heavily leans on some exploitation ideas and tropes, which being an exploitation guy myself, a lot of it is very fun. To really talk about whether or not this movie can truly or honestly be really fairly reviewed by the general public is kind of hard to say for sure. This movie was made really with a built-in fan base. I doubt the Brad Jones or director Ryan Mitchell is really thinking that this is something that will appeal to absolutely everyone who enjoys comedy. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Some could say, well, maybe it's a little bit of low-hanging fruit just to make a movie for fans, but let's be honest, that's not a new concept. I mean, you could frankly say that Marvel or DC, or even when the Mystery Science Theater movie came out back in the mid-90s, it was made with a built-in fan base. I know as a fan, I very, very much appreciated this movie. I thought it was very funny. There were some really great moments of just Brad Jones being the cinema snob and being the way he reacts to certain things is just it's funny. It's what makes his character, I think, really really appeal to his fans, particularly his YouTube base. Um, and there are some really nice moments from other characters, in particular Tamara Chambers, who plays a fledgling YouTube personality named Shelly Songs. She is really adorable in this movie, and I mean, she has a way of, when she has something to say or when she's just kind of in the background someplace doing something, you're kind of drawn to her, and I think that was really really well casted and really really well played. But if I were to show this movie to my dad or even to Jason, who's seen some of the Cinema Snob movies or show rather, I don't think it would register in the same way, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. In a way, it kind of feels a little bit more personal. It would be like going to see your favorite musician at a bar as opposed to at like Wembley Stadium or something where you're there with 100,000 other screaming people. It's a little bit more personal. It's certainly something for fans to really appreciate. And it got me thinking about another movie that I dearly loved from about 20 years ago called Free Enterprise. And that's a movie in which two Star Trek fans meet and become friends with William Shatner. And at first they think of him as Captain Kirk. And then they realize that no, he's kind of just a doofus. And there's an underlying joke with that movie that if you kind of understand that, particularly if you're a Star Trek fan, as I was, or as I am, I should say, you grow up on the original series as I did, and you appreciate Captain Kirk in a way that is you can't separate William Shatner from Captain Kirk, as I probably have been guilty of too. It makes for kind of an inside joke. If you understand all of that, then Free Enterprise is an amazingly funny movie. And that's kind of what you have here. Not to really kind of go in, again, I don't really want to give away too many spoilers because this movie is literally 13 hours old as I'm recording this. There's comment about being a YouTube celebrity. And there's comment about internet, living your life on the internet as a what people would call themselves a content creator. And it's really interesting because it's kind of the Wild West, but there's also this weird groupthink online, whether you go to a site that's politically charged one side or the other, or it's socially charged, or it's just a comedy site, or it's just, you know, you're watching videos that somebody makes on YouTube. It becomes almost like a school of fish that follow these people around and that follow these ideas. And it's interesting because the first person who tends to lose their voice in that is the content creator themselves. And there are three characters in this, and you have Neil and Craig, who are kind of loser filmmakers. Not to mention that Neil has some past issues with how he directed some actors, and particularly waterboarding an actress to get her to perform a particular way. And Craig, of course, he's kind of built himself a shield with the Cinema Snob, where he feels like he's great because all he ever hears from people is that he's great. when his movie fails, he doesn't know how to react to it. Then you have a character named Bryce, who is a gaming Twitch content creator. And he went on a tirade about how he doesn't think circus freaks should have any rights because they're weird. And of course, now he's dealing with the blowback from that. And you have these three characters who are jaded in some way or another. They've either been jaded by doing the same thing for too long, they're not very good at something, or they're jaded because they had a fan base turn their back on them. And then you have the fourth main character, which is the Shelley character, who is she just wants to sing songs online, and she just wants to feel good about it, and she can't get recognized. She can't get any. When she does get recognized, it's by the wrong people. She just wants to be happy in what she does, and what she does is sing. And it's such a I guess a nice little opposition to the jaded long-time content creators, where you just have somebody who she just wants her voice to be heard, and it creates these nice little subplots and these nice little moments between these characters. And it's something that, again, maybe people outside of Brad Jones's fandom would understand. Maybe other content creators, fans would understand that, even if they are not that familiar with the Cinema Snob. But it's interesting to hear, really, maybe for the first time, even though it's scripted, even though it's used for plot, a little bit for a plot device, but it certainly moves forward a lot of character relationship. But it's interesting to hear these people and hear these characters kind of talk about these things, about what happens if they just suddenly don't want to do what they want to do or what they've done anymore. What happens to them at that point? If they try to change their content, will there be a mass exodus? Will they fail? Would they be, and it's really interesting, because it is kind of this whole new idea and this whole new world of this probably small time celebrity, but something that is maybe much smaller but just as loud of support or criticism that any other celebrity at any other level might receive. And it certainly wants to, and there's probably reasons for this, but it certainly wants to talk about what happens when Backlash happens. What happens when now, instead of being everything that you ever were that was good, is now entirely all bad. How does one deal with that? And that kind of creates some. That's a little bit more on the drama level of this movie, but certainly there are some very, very funny jokes. There are some very funny clips on YouTube that are just well-timed, funny moments. And some of the plot is so bonkers and out there that, yeah, it really is what you might have seen in some small budget, mostly forgotten exploitation horror film now, where people get stranded in a particular town. They've got to deal with killer clowns, cannibal farmers, and so on and so forth. But it's without being able to say necessarily that I can fairly judge this movie, I will say that I'm very proud that I was a part of the fundraising part of it, that I was able to help chip in and get this movie made, because it was well worth it. It's a fun hour and 50 minutes. If you are a fan of Brad Jones or of the Cinema Snob, I definitely recommend that you check it out. You do not have to see the first movie. Anytime that they reference something that took place in the first movie, it's kind of its own thing, and they don't reference it so deeply that you have to exactly know exactly how that scene in that movie worked out. Although I do recommend seeing the first movie too, because this also does create an interesting how much a bigger budget, how much 7 years can make a difference in how a story is told, the timing, the editing, all of that. One other thing I will say, there are absolutely kind of jokes that are mentioned early in the movie that you actually see what there's jokes, there are things that are talked about at the beginning of the movie that are tropes or things that they dislike, that these characters dislike seeing in movies. And then you see those very things later in the movie. And it kind of helps build this, I'm not really sure how to put it. It almost feels like it helps kind of build this fantasy world that YouTube creators are kind of in as these kind of side celebrities that have huge followings, but maybe not something that translates to quite the same way as, say, a Tom Cruise or a Jack Nicholson would. I don't know. It's one of those things that that as things come up, you remember characters saying that they dislike that very thing. It's very much a it's very much a helps kind of create that inside joke that is used for the comedy of this movie. But anyway, I definitely recommend checking it out. I wanted to make sure that I commented on this because it's a thing that informs some of my movie taste and certainly like I said, if you go to bmovieanima.com, either search for or go into the archives into April of 2019, you'll see a little bit more about what my strenuous at best connection, or at least my fandom of Brad Jones is. So yeah, definitely check that out. If you are a fan of the Cinema Snob, or you're a fan of kind of silly comedy that is kind of exploitation in nature, but certainly you're fascinated by kind of internet stardom, this might be something interesting to at least take a look at or explore more of his weekly Cinema Snob show. Again, I can't fairly review this, but I certainly enjoyed it. I'm certainly very pleased for Ryan Mitchell and Brad Jones to have gotten this completed for the budget that they were able to raise, and that I was able to help out with it. But in a couple of days, check back on filmseizure.com. Jason Oliver, Chuck Moore, and myself, we are going to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the new Quentin Tarantino film. Monday, of course, is Monster Mondays. This week I've got The Horror of Party Beach, which has one of my favorite goofy monsters ever. And then next week on Wednesday, you can hear Jason and I talk about the 1975 blockbuster, the first ever blockbuster, Steven Spielberg's Jaws. But until then, like I said, you can find our stuff on filmseizure.com. You can go to iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, Spotify, and YouTube to find all of our stuff on each of those sites. But until next time, make sure you save me the aisle seat.
There will be no peace until that man, the Cinema Snob, reviews our very own E.T. porno parody.